Okay.
Today I'm in France and I want to be an environmental scientist, so I asked my grandpa to ask Christian.
Yeah.
So can we make recycled plastics to a toy?
Yeah, big problem of the plastics now that are found everywhere in the environment. And well, there are many different types of plastics, as you know. Now, well, and maybe some plastics could be recycled and be made toys. But many of the plastics cannot be recycled. There is nothing to do with them. And well, these plastics are thrown away in the garbage, or just people trash them in the environment. And then slowly they move into the rivers because the rain will bring them there. And then they will move into the ocean and become microplastics. Very, 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 very small pieces of plastic that are lost, in a sense. So there is no way to get them back easily because they are so small. But the problem is that fish are eating them and other organisms, and we eat the fish after. So we eat microplastics. And now it has been found that because of that, every year we eat quite a large amount of plastics. And we don't know because, you know, it's part of the food. And we don't know, maybe it will be very bad for our health. So it means that at least the plastics that are made by companies should be plastics that can be recycled, used for making toys, or for making other plastics, like some plastic bottles are made with recycled plastics. So at least, and after that, the best would be to reduce the amount of plastics that we are making and replace them by other products. For example, bottles. Well, bottles, they can be in glass instead of plastics. Bags, they can be in paper instead of plastic. So, ideal is to reduce as much as possible the amount of plastics we are producing. But at least if we continue to produce plastic, they should be recyclable. So we should be able to recycle them and use some of them to make toys, as you suggest. Okay?
Okay. The next question is, why does carbon dioxide warm up the earth?
Yeah. So carbon dioxide, you know, is a gas. So there is everywhere in the atmosphere. It's a very, very tiny amount of gas in the atmosphere. Most of the atmosphere is gas called nitrogen. Another part is oxygen. And we know it's important because we need oxygen to breathe. So everything goes inside, but what we use is oxygen. And when we breathe, oxygen inside, CO2 out. Because inside it is transformed. Oxygen becomes CO2. Oxygen is O. CO2 is made of carbon and oxygen. So why is it a problem? Because, well, in general, there has always been CO2 on the planet. And in fact, CO2 is very important. It's very useful. First, because CO2 is a gas that is reflecting heat. So heat, where is it coming from, the heat? From
Space?
Yes, and what in space is making that heat? The sun. The sun is sending heat. Yes, most of heat that we have on Earth is from the sun. So the sun is sending heat, and it's warming up the Earth. So the Earth is sending heat back, and normally it's quite in equilibrium. And it can be a very low equilibrium. That is, heat we receive, the Earth receive, and the heat the Earth send back can be such that the Earth is very cold, because the Earth will send back much heat, in the atmosphere. So it happened sometimes that the Earth was very, very cold, but never so cold that it killed all life. Because of what? Because in the atmosphere there is CO2. And CO2 has this property that it lets heat go down from the sun. The sun is there, the heat goes down to the Earth. But when the heat goes back, CO2 is like a mirror, sends some of the heat back, so that there is the equilibrium between the heat that comes down and goes out, is creating a temperature that is comfortable, about 15 degrees on the average. So this is the role of CO2, is to keep the Earth warm enough. But the problem now is that we're putting more and more and more CO2 in the atmosphere by burning the fossil fuels, that is coal and oil and natural gas. So we're burning them, and it's releasing CO2 in the atmosphere, creating more heat, and part of that heat is kept because the CO2 reflects back, and it increases the temperature of Earth. So CO2 in itself is necessary. A certain amount is necessary to keep the Earth comfortable. Too much CO2 makes the Earth warmer. And this is what we experience now with the planet becoming warmer because of the CO2 we're putting in the atmosphere. Yeah?
Yeah.
Okay. You can think about that.
Why is seawater salty?
Yeah, that's a very good question. In fact, if we look at the water on Earth, what can you imagine? You have seawater. You have also fresh water in rivers, in lakes, and water we get in the house coming from reservoirs that we can drink. And there is also in some areas frozen water, ice. So on some mountains, for example, there is ice. If you look at Fujisan, we see pictures of Fujisan with the top with ice in winter. So this is frozen water, ice and snow. And in some areas, like the Antarctic continent, there are kilometers thick of ice on the continent. So there are different forms of water. And there is also water in the atmosphere, like vapor. When we feel that the climate is, the air is very damp. For example, in summertime in Japan, it's very difficult to go around because we feel so hot. One is because of temperature, but also because of the water that is in the air. So there is water in many different forms, but most of the water on Earth is salty. So it's seawater. Most of the water. All the other forms are just tiny part of water. So seawater is salty. Well, we can say, since most water on Earth is salty, then this is natural. So this is natural because water dissolves everything. So if you put something in water, it will dissolve it. Some things dissolve very fast. For example, if you put sugar in hot water, well, it dissolves very fast. If you put salt in hot water, it dissolves very fast. If you put a piece of iron in water, it does not dissolve. But if you come many, many years later, part of it is rusted and has disappeared. So water will dissolve anything given time. So the Earth is very, very old. Very, very, very old. So since a very long time there has been water on Earth. And this water has dissolved part of the rocks that makes the Earth. And by dissolving the rocks, it made the water is salty. The salt we found in the seawater is former rocks. In the past, they were part of the rocks, and they were extracted by the water running around. So in fact, the real question is the other one. So it is normal that water is salty because water dissolves everything. So the main problem is that how is it happening that some water is not salty? Because most of the water is salty. So we will think all the water should be salty. But water in the rivers and in the lake is not salty. So why? So this water that we find in rivers and lakes, in fact, recently it was in the ocean, and it was salty. And because all the time water evaporates, because the earth is not frozen, so all the time there is a bit of water going in the atmosphere, create moisture. This moisture accumulates in the clouds, and at some time the clouds make the rain, and the rain is not salty. So in fact, water, fresh water that we find in lakes and in rivers, and that we drink at home, it is water that was in the ocean. It went into the atmosphere, leaving the salt behind. Just the water came out, and the salt left behind. This water went into the clouds and fell on the continents, creating fresh water. And this fresh water flows back to the ocean, becomes salt water again, but some of it always goes out by the heat of the earth and comes back onto the continent. So you see, it's a cycle. And when there are problems is when this cycle is changed. And we see that now because of climate change. In some regions, there is less and less rain. In some, there is too much rain, but in some, there is less and less rain because we disrupt the natural cycle because of the climate change. So, in fact, the great problem is to be sure that we keep always enough of the fresh water, because we need fresh water. It's fun to go in the sea and swim in the sea, but we cannot drink it. You have tried to taste sometimes the seawater. When you swim in the sea, did you taste?
Yes.
Yeah. Did you like?
No.
No. Okay. You prefer fresh water.
Yes.
So it's very important to be very careful to keep the nature functioning so that all the time there is enough water coming out of the ocean into the atmosphere and falling on continents, so that we keep enough fresh water, because we need fresh water. So you see, your question was very good, but it was hiding another question, because you were wondering how is it happening that seawater is salty, but in fact the big question is how is it happening that fresh water is not salty, because all water should be salty, given the fact that water always takes salt from the rocks. So it was a very interesting question, with another question inside.
And the last question is, why is boat not good for our planet?
Yeah, that's difficult, because again, it's like CO2. There are good aspects and other aspects that are not so good. So boats are very good because they can carry very large amounts of objects, cars, or food, or other products. So it means that transporting objects, transporting materials with ship is very economical. So it does not require too much energy, and then it should not make too much pollution compared to transporting the same amount of material by road using trucks, or by plane, by air using planes. So ships are slow and they transport huge amount of materials from one place to another. So this should be good. But there are problems. This is what you're saying. one of these problems is that for propulsion, ships are using very bad oil. And you have seen that. Sometimes you look at ships and you see very black smoke coming out of the funnel of the ship. So it means that it's because they are using very low quality oil to make the engine of the ship functioning. So this is one of the problems, is that to keep the cost of transportation very low, then they use the cheapest type of fuel for the ships. And maybe in the future that will be changed, because you know, in the past, perhaps you have seen pictures of that, ships were using sails. They were using the wind for propulsion. Well, look at this one. This is a ship, you know the ship, the painting that you have here? You know what is this ship? So, your grandmother, Mammy, it was a ship officer. She learned, she studied to be a ship officer, and she navigated on this ship, and then she painted it after that. So it was a school to learn how to navigate. So ships can go use sails. Of course, nowadays not many ships use sails, only school ships use, and also ships, well, you have seen here outside on the sea, just for fun, small ships using sails. But there are projects to create commercial ships now with sails, not using engine anymore. So that is an aspect of pollution that may disappear in the future, because oil is becoming more and more costly anyway, and technology allows to make sailboats better, more efficient. So maybe that aspect will disappear. Another problem with ships is that to navigate, some of the ships are only like one-way ships, if you wish. That is, ships transporting oil or gas, natural gas under liquid form. These ships, they go in regions where they produce or they extract the oil or petroleum from the soil or the natural gas, put that on the ship, huge ship, we call them tankers. So, and they transport that to countries like Japan, which has no production of oil or natural gas. So the oil and natural gas used in Japan is coming from other countries, so they bring to Japan. But then these big ships, they are like a big tub, if you wish. So they have nothing to put from Japan to transport back to, let's say, Saudi Arabia or Russia, where they are producing these fuels. So they need to put something in the ship. So what they do, they put water. They pump seawater in Japan, and then they go back to the country to put again oil on the ship. And when they arrive in that country, they pump the water, seawater taken in Japan, they pump it out of the ship in the local waters, and they put the oil on board the ship and go back to Japan with oil, take seawater there, and so they carry seawater. And in the seawater there are organisms. And often, not so often, but it happens quite often because there are so many of these ships, these organisms will survive in the new environment and will become very destructive, will kill the local animals, and then because they have no, they are new there, nobody knows them, so they become very powerful and very destructive. So this is called invasive species or alien species in English. That is, species that come from another country, another continent, come by the ships, in the water of the ships, in the ballast water of the ships, to a new country, and there most of the time they die, but sometimes some of them survive and become very destructive. So this is another problem with ships. And another problem, finally, is that sometimes there are accidents. Ships break, and then all their content goes into the sea and can create a very bad pollution of oil, but also sometimes chemicals that are in the ship, and then destroy very much the fish that are living there, the seafood that are living in that area, and also the birds, the seabirds that come to the sea to eat, and that they are find themselves into the drifting oil or bad chemicals, and they die. So that is another problem with the ships. So the boats have some problems, but if we are careful, putting sails on them for navigation, preventing the pumping of transportation of seawater from one place to another, making them stronger so that they don't break so often. If we are careful, maybe boats could be very good because they consume very little fuel for transporting very huge amounts of goods. Okay?
Okay.
Great. So you have very good questions. You must prepare other ones. Huh? Okay. Yeah, I will write, yes, in this book. Okay, so you have a pen. I would like to try this pen on this paper before. Yeah, okay, this is good. Okay, so I would say to Leo, and maybe you agree sometimes to show your book to Mayu, to Yoshi, and to Noe? Yeah, so I would say, and also, okay. Mayu, Yoshi, and Noe. Okay. With love. Good. Okay. We'll put maybe the date. So what is the date today? 17. 17/08/2021. Okay. And we put the city, Nice, France. Okay? Okay, I think this is good. Okay.
Why did we come?
What is it? Oh. So, thank you very. This is the same written here.
No. It's,
What is? Can you tell me?
Thank you for playing with me.
Yes. Okay. So, thank you very much. And you can have other questions some other time. Okay, this is good. Okay. So I keep this and you keep this. And good.
Thank you.
Okay.